We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us for Transgender Day of Visibility Beyond the Binary. My name is Heather Maggio. My pronouns are they, them, she, her, and I am the interim president of the Queer Student Association. Our guests may notice that the chat function is disabled, and just so you know, that was an intentional choice in order to avoid our event being Zoom bombed. These cyber attacks have been happening far too often to campus events here at SLCC and around the country. And while we value our guests' participation, we also recognize the need to keep our panelists safe from would-be hackers. Please feel free, though, to post questions if you have them, and we'll address them as possible. Thanks so much for your understanding. Now I want to introduce to you our moderator. Sue Robbins is a woman who is transgender, intersex, and pansexual, and uses the pronouns she, her, and hers. She is currently the co-host of Everyday People at KRCL Radioactive, raising LGBTQ voices and issues, and also serves on Equality Utah's Transgender Advisory Council. She is a past board chair of the Utah Pride Center and of the Transgender Education Advocates, or T, of Utah, along with being a founding member and the inaugural president of Phi Delta, Utah's chapter of Tri-S. Sue has been recognized with the 2018 Transgender Advocacy Team Award and the 2019 Dr. Kirsten Reese's Community Service Award. Sue is an electrical engineer currently employed with a government contractor. She is a proud veteran with 20 years of service in the U.S. Army, working first as a tank crew member and later in satellite communications. Sue lives in Woods Cross with her loving and amazing wife, Teresa, and has 4 kids and 10 grandchildren. Thank you for moderating for us, Sue Robbins. Please take it away.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. And an amazing dog, too. I'm going to have to add that. Pretty fun. She's closed out, so she doesn't bug us here. So welcome, everybody. I appreciate you coming in. This is a day of visibility for our community, and it's an important day for us. Transgender Day of Visibility was founded by Rachel Crandall back in 2009 as a lack of reaction in the LGBT community, or lack of recognition in the LGBT community of transgender individuals, citing that frustration that the only well-known transgender-centered day was Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is a somber day for us where we mourn the murders of transgender individuals. But it did not acknowledge and celebrate living members of the transgender community. So for that, we have today. And I want to go straight to lifting the voices of the people who will talk about how important this visibility is. But I'd like to mention there is a Q&A function there. If you see it at the bottom of your Zoom, please, if you feel free asking questions, bring them on in and we'll go through them as we go along. Some of them that are pertinent to what we're talking about, we'll try to answer right away. Others, we may wait till we get through a subject before we address the question, depending on what the question is, but we do want to hear your questions. So let me start off by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And I'd like to start with Kelsey. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kelsey Kehoe. My pronouns are they, them. I am the Youth, Family, and Education Manager here at the Utah Pride Center. So I love working with our youth and our families to provide, safe and affirming spaces for them to explore their identities, but also working to provide education to organizations and individuals who want to make their spaces more LGBTQIA+ inclusive and affirming. And so, yeah, just working really hard to make as many spaces as possible inclusive as possible.
Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate you coming on. Maximus, if you could introduce yourself next, please.
Hello, my name is Maximus. I'm currently a student at SLCC. I am 20 years old and I am transgender. I started transitioning, my medical transition, about 2 years ago, so I'll be 2 in July, so I'm really excited for that. And this is my first step into transgender activism, so.
Glad to have your voice here. Thank you for participating. Kayla, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, my name is Kayla Aitken. I go by she, her pronouns. I am a trans woman. I am currently unemployed due to COVID, but I am a computer programmer and aspiring data scientist. So I'm working towards that end right now. And yeah, I think that's about it for me.
You do a bit of work with a particular event, I believe.
Oh yes, Gender Evolution. I've been on the Gender Evolution Planning Committee for 5 years. I think this is year number 6 now. So we're excited for the possibility of having another in-person event. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah, we're starting to look good. So I look forward to the potential of Gender Evolution in person. Thank you for all that volunteering. That's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, thank you.
Nick?
Yeah, Nick Arteaga, he, him, they, them. And I get to work alongside Kelsey-ish as the community programs coordinator for the Utah Pride Center. I kind of dabble in a little bit of everything right now that we're physically closed, but I love working with the community. I love uplifting folks who generally don't have a voice or a platform in our community, even though they're very much a big part of the population that we serve, namely, people of color, or Black trans people of color. I mean, Black trans people, all the people in the cutie BIPOC acronym that often get left out of these spaces, myself included. So this work is very near and dear to me, and it's nice to be in a space where we can make a difference. So I'm very grateful to be here. And
you've dabbled in gender evolution a little bit too, I hear, just a bit.
It sounds familiar. I can't say for sure. No, yeah, I've been very fortunate again to be in a space where I can help plan this really important event that happens in November every year. This will be our 13th annual year for Gender Evolution. So yeah, thank you, Sue.
Thank you, and appreciate everybody's voices. So to start off, some people may be coming in at a very base knowledge. So I'd like to go ahead and offer to them your thoughts on what it means to you to be transgender and what cisgender then means, and then taking it to a little further for them, what non-binary means. So Kelsey, could you please start with your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So transgender is sort of an umbrella term that describes folks whose sex assigned at birth and their gender identity do not correspond in the way that our society usually expects. Whereas cisgender is somebody whose sex assigned at birth and gender identity correspond or align in the way that our society expects. And sort of under the transgender umbrella, we have non-binary. And that's actually how I identify. I identify as a queer non-binary person. And so non-binary is kind of experienced in a variety of different ways by different individuals, but often is used by folks who don't identify with the binary of man-woman. And so there are some folks who kind of feel like they're in this middle space. There are some folks who feel like they are completely outside or beyond the binary of man and woman. And there are some folks that are kind of anywhere and everywhere in between. And so there's not one way to be non-binary. So that's kind of how I try to explain it to folks. I know it can be confusing if you've never heard of non-binary before, but really just recognizing the biggest thing is that these are valid identities, even if you don't fully understand them.
And to go to the next step, Kayla, we hear non-binary, but sometimes we hear other terms like non-conforming or fluid. So what do these different identities mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of identify with more of a binary female end of the spectrum, I guess. And it is a spectrum. Gender isn't just male or female. And while it is a social construct, it's something that, we're not all 100% female or 100% male. We all kind of fall somewhere along that line. And that's what it means to be, kind of more non-binary. And then others who maybe are agender don't feel that they really fall anywhere on the spectrum. Someone who might be gender fluid, they may feel that one day they're more on this end of the spectrum and another day more on this end of the spectrum. It's more of a literal fluid thing. So that's kind of what that means to me.
So Nick, to take it in another direction, I've heard people who say they identify as a non-binary transmasculine. So when you hear that, how do you describe what someone should take away from those two parts?
Yeah, so I personally identify that way. When I first started transitioning, I did see gender identity as very binary, very linear. And most people say, oh, I was born male and now I'm a female. And sometimes that can be a little bit problematic in the way that people interpret that, as though they were assigned something and so that's who they are, but now they're making that change, when I think it would be more authentic to say, this is what I was assigned at birth, but that was incorrect. And now I'm slowly regressing back to the person who I am, so to speak, as far as in society's eyes, because it's frowned upon. That's not something you can just change or do. So when I first came out, I was very much wanting to cling to the binary identity of being, a man. And now, just as I've learned to appreciate the parts of myself that were socialized as a woman, having been assigned female at birth, I don't want to limit myself and the way that I view my gender as strictly, as a man or as a male. So I identify as non-binary because it just allows me to do and wear and say and act and talk and be just whoever I am without having to explain myself or feeling that pressure, that internalized pressure of gender performance. And I say transmasculine because I don't want to erase my transgender identity, in that some people view transgender and non-binary as two different things when they're kind of one and the same. So for me, I like to emphasize the transmasculine part, so folks know that I am transgender and I do enjoy my male passing privilege. But I know that there's more to me than just one or the other. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. And it's a good description of how there's two elements to the way that you identify. So thank you. So Maximus, the part that I'd like to ask you in relation to this is, especially being within your first 2 years, you may still feel the strength of this, is what do your pronouns mean to you, for both you're using them and for people recognizing them and using them back?
For me, my pronouns, for me personally, I'm validating myself. I don't feel like I need people to validate me because I see myself as a man that I see every single day in the mirror. But when people use it, it feels fantastic because it doesn't feel like I'm hiding myself behind. So when I was younger, I always felt like I was weird and a different child. And then I stumbled upon the LGBT community, and it took me a while to accept I was transgender. So when I found my transgender identity as a transgender man and using my he, him pronouns, I felt complete with myself. I felt like I could finally start to love myself in a way that I could have never experienced had I not transitioned or found the transgender community. So pronouns are very important for me, myself, to validate myself, but it also helps when other people validate the person that I see myself as.
Great. Well, thank you. So I'd like to move into the other part that gets confused a lot. We talk sexual orientation, we talk gender identity, and people sometimes struggle with why those are different. So Kelsey, could you talk a little bit about the difference between those and what it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are two things that are often, kind of used interchangeably in an incorrect way. So I think it's great to kind of clarify that here. So gender identity has to do with kind of who you know yourself to be, or how you feel about yourself kind of on the inside. And sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. And so when we classify our attraction based on gender identity, that is how we get sexual orientation. And so to kind of summarize, gender identity is who you know yourself to be. Sexual orientation is who you want to be with.
Great. And so Nick, one of the things I've heard at times with some people is, as they explored their gender identity, it gave them more room to explore their sexual orientation. Do you feel like that once you get on an exploration track of some element of who you are, that it allows you to open up in other areas?
Yes. I think the more that we know, the more we listen to other people, the more we can internalize that and see a lot of those similarities in ourselves. So I personally once was a lesbian, because I was a woman at that time, or yeah, and was attracted to feminine people, other women. And so it's really interesting because when I began my transition, I then more or less identified as straight. So that kind of changed a little bit because now I was presenting as male, or, fitting into that role that I always desired to see myself in. And now I can do that. And then when I started taking testosterone, I actually realized, but wait, there was more to it. Now I can just find myself attracted to any person, just, based off the connection that we have, conversation, things like that. So it's really opened up the doors as far as attraction, emotionally, romantically. It's really changed things up a bit. And I'm not saying that testosterone was a cause, but I think in finding that congruency between my gender identity and how I appeared outward, and just how emotionally and mentally validating it was, I think it allowed me to then realize that yeah, I had a lot more room in my heart for all genders instead of just the one.
So Kayla, based on something Nick said there, and I'm going to project a little on a thought of mine, is once you identify as transgender and you self-explore, does it potentially erase gender in your mind as a sexual consideration in your orientation?
That is a great question, and kind of goes along with a thought that I had I wanted to mention. When we're talking about gender, it's often said that gender is what's between our ears and not what's between our legs. And we can actually see that in brain scans. We've looked at, those who identify more on the female end of the spectrum versus cisgender folks, and we can see that the part in the brain that is responsible for gender, seems to match more with the female for trans women, and more for male in the trans men. In the study, it was a real binary study, so they didn't really look at non-traditional binary genders. But the point of that is the participants in the study had a various range of sexual attractions, which didn't affect how that showed up on the brain scan. So we know that gender in the brain is a separate area than the brain where sexual attraction is. I feel like more than for me, at least, having a difference of sexual attraction, it was more just feeling a sense of freedom and being able to express that. Since I'd given myself more freedom to express my gender, I started to feel that same freedom to express my sexuality as well. And I happen to be pansexual, so kind of like Nick, I can be attracted to just about anybody, but you have to hold my attention.
Awesome. And Maximus, do you want to add into some of your thoughts in relation to the difference between the two and how one might impact the other?
Yeah, so basically what Kelsey was saying, it's their different sexual attraction is just how if you want to be with that person, and then gender identity is how you identify as a person. I personally identify as a heterosexual male because I'm in a heterosexual couple, in a marriage. But I find myself sometimes dwelling and looking at other men, and I kind of have questioned myself. I'm like, am I attracted to you, or do I want to look like you? Like, I can't differentiate yet. And I feel like with my gender identity and getting to know myself better, I'll be able to differentiate that soon. Oh, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. And so the theme of this panel is beyond the binary. So we've talked about binary. We've talked about what non-binary means. So what does beyond the binary mean to you? And let me start with Kayla this time.
Well, kind of along the lines of what I mentioned before, everything's a spectrum. So I don't really feel like I fit on a binary end of the spectrum sexually, but I feel like I fit more on the binary end of the female spectrum. But that doesn't mean that I don't, wear pants. It doesn't mean that I don't choose to not wear makeup or, go out not wearing a dress. All those things are social constructs. So for me, I realized that that's a choice that I make every day. And so it's a conscious thing. It's not something that I guess it's something that I'm very aware of all the time. And I think that a lot of trans people are, especially with, trying to feel like they have to fit in to a specific gender. And so being able to realize that gender is a spectrum, it helps us to not feel so constrained. And I feel like that's been the case for me.
Great, thank you. Kelsey, would you like to add your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I feel like, in our society, we always want to put people in boxes, and people always want to put us in boxes. And I feel like when we talk about and think about beyond the binary, it's almost like breaking free of those boxes and just letting yourself be who you are and not forcing yourself to shrink into and be in this box that doesn't feel right, that isn't comfortable. And so beyond the binary is kind of, living and saying, this is who I am, and I don't need to fit in your boxes because I'm just a person and I'm going to live as the person that I am. And so really kind of just pushing back and challenging what our society like so often tries to condition us to believe. So that's what beyond the binary means to me.
And Nick, I'm certain you have an interesting perspective on this because the way you just described your identity, I think, kind of really blows some of this out on the meaning of beyond the binary.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Kelsey and Kayla said. Essentially, I just see it as something that I've seen is the future is fluid, right? So it's like, I like what Kelsey said about breaking outside of these boxes that we try to put ourselves into. And I think that's just what we do as humans. We want to, know who are safe people, who we have things in common with, where if somebody's from the same place that we are, we try and, congregate with people like us. So labels are important sometimes in that we can find our community and people who have similar experiences to us. But in a way, yes, they can be restrictive. And so what I imagine when we say beyond the binary is down with the patriarchy. And basically just existing and doing things that are fun, doing things that we like, being with the people we love, and not having to worry about whether, other people are going to approve of it or not. So I think just kind of to emphasize even further, it's just, being free and being who we are without worrying about labels so much. But I also wanted to point out that labels are important sometimes to find community and people that are going to be safe for us.
Great. Well, thank you. So Maximus, on to another question is, and this is an audience question, so thank you for asking for the audience member. What do you wish you knew about transition when you started? Do you wish you knew before you started that transition?
Honestly, when I started testosterone, nobody told me you're gonna sweat. You're just gonna sweat as much, like buckets on buckets on buckets. Like everybody's like, you're gonna have a nice beard and everything, but you're gonna sweat. You're gonna get hair where you didn't think you could grow hair, and mood swings. Sometimes you're gonna feel like really happy, and the next second you're gonna want to punch a wall or something. And basically, for me, what was difficult was to understand that I was going through puberty again. I was a 19-year-old, but I was going through puberty again. So my brain was going through a change again, and I wasn't allowing myself the space that I had allowed myself from the ages of 12 to 16 to explore myself as a teenager again. Not enough people stress that enough, that like, hey, you're going through puberty. It's okay for you to be emotional some days. It's okay that some days you feel like very insecure and you're getting acne all over. It's high school all over again. And I just feel like that's some crucial things we don't state a lot in the transgender community, that sometimes you don't have your head on you because, well, we're going through puberty again. It's teenage years all over again.
It can be a lot. Nick, do you want to add to this?
Yes. Yeah. Just to kind of add on to that, I think something that I wished I would have paid more attention to, because I'm sure people told me, is I think we look at these milestones in what a traditional transition would look like. And for me, I think I just thought, okay, I just need to get on hormones, and my depression and my anxiety, PTSD, all of the horrible things haunting me will suddenly disappear because now I'm on T. Or, now I just need to get top surgery, and then, I'll be less insecure. The dysphoria will go away. And the reality is that these things will just essentially be lifelong things that you kind of just need to learn to deal with. They may be dissipated. The hormone replacement therapy and the gender affirming procedures that some people choose to take because there's no right way to transition, are going to just fix everything and cure everything. As a transgender person, our identity is only part of what we experience as human beings. And although it compounds everything and makes it a little bit harder, I think for me personally, I wish that I would have just like Maximus said, really given myself the space to process and understand that this will help things, but it won't cure me, right? Like I still have a lot of things I need to work through in spite of that. And I think people look forward to that and may be disappointed when that doesn't seem to be the case. And so it's really hard to navigate, because you're like, I got everything that I needed to fix myself, but I still feel broken. And I think, again, it has a lot to do with how we're treated in society. So even though we're okay with ourselves, the validation from outside forces is something that we all seek, and something that we all need. And so when we're not getting that, I think that's something people should consider. Work on yourself mentally, emotionally, and everything else is just physical, because you still are who you are. But that's mine.
Great. And Kelsey, I'd like to add, if you're comfortable addressing this, as a non-binary individual, transition can look so different to some people. Potentially, it could just be a pronoun change, and that might be the entire transition for someone.
Yeah, Nick kind of touched on this in saying that there's no one right way to transition. Like you said, some folks change their pronouns and they feel valid in their identity by doing that. Some folks will wear different clothes, or maybe get a haircut, or maybe will, wear makeup or not wear makeup, or some will go on hormones, some will have surgeries, and some won't. And there's just so many different ways that folks can transition. I know when I personally was starting to kind of figure out my gender identity, I started changing my clothes, and I immediately threw away like all of my skinny jeans and all of these things, because I felt like I wasn't allowed to wear those if I was going to be trans. And so now I wear skinny jeans because some days that's what I want to wear. And so, kind of just recognizing that transition isn't always just a one and done thing and then you're good to go. You might feel like right now changing your pronouns is enough to make you feel valid. In a couple years, you might say, you know what, I think I want top surgery, or I think I want to go on hormones. And so you don't have to make every decision right now. You can take time to figure it out and feel out what is going to, make you feel like your most authentic self. And it's okay for that to grow and change and expand and whatnot.
Well, thank you. And Kayla, as a trans woman, you may have a different perspective to add in here. So what are your thoughts?
I mean, I feel like it's not really required to do all the things, right? As mentioned, a transition can be as simple as a pronoun change. So it's really not something that's required, but in the end, gender is all a performance. And so we get to choose to what level we want to perform. And I think that coming to that realization is very freeing. And I think that, whether non-binary, gender fluid, or otherwise, it's just being able to have that conscious decision every day that you get to choose how you're perceived. I think that's a great thing to come to realize.
Well, thank you. So Maximus, Transgender Day of Visibility. This is your second one, I assume, if I'm keeping track correctly. So what do you feel the value of being visible is now that you've experienced coming out and gone through probably a lot of levels of experience to have this day of visibility? What does that mean to you? And are there any inherent dangers to that visibility?
To me, it means that we're here, we're strong, we're brave, and we'll continue to be here whether you see us or not because we see ourselves. The only danger with that is some people might want to target us for that by stating, oh, you guys don't need a day, but I would like for you to walk one day in my shoes and see if you can handle it. And essentially, as we grow stronger as a community, the less dangerous it will get for us, the stronger we get. Essentially, the more we show these people that, hey, you can tell me as many times as you want that you still see me as a woman. I do not care. I have friends, I have love, I have loved ones, and I have myself telling me I'm a man, and I'm going to keep fighting so future generations don't have to be afraid to be visible, so that one day it just won't be a day, it can be the whole year that is visibility for us.
Great. Thank you. And Nick, do you have some thoughts about visibility and the benefits versus whether there may be any dangers?
Yeah, so visibility for me just means representing all of what the transgender community is, right? Those of us who don't do it, who are visible and making changes in our community, and also to unfortunately highlight all of the disparities and the violence and the really high suicide rates and other things that are affecting our community. So I mentioned this earlier, it's very bittersweet. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. So Kelsey, in this, we're seeing a lot of discussion about the transgender community nationally because of all the laws. How do you think our visibility helps combat that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As you mentioned, we have been the target of too many bills, and a few of which were right here in Utah. And I think when we're able to show up and show people that we are who we are, and we are not, try to convert other people to be who we are or anything like that. When we are visible and show our humanity and show that we're just trying to live our lives like everybody else, I think that helps other people realize that trans women aren't trying to take over sports, or that we aren't doctors aren't mutilating our bodies when we are seeking gender affirming care, that these are life-saving things. Being a part of sports are life-saving. Getting gender affirming care is life-saving. And that, like I said, we're just trying to live. A lot of times we're just trying to survive. And I think when people can see us for who we are, and that we have a lot more in common than we probably, tend to think, I think, folks can see us as human and see us that we deserve the same access to care. We deserve the same opportunities that cisgender people get.
Thank you. So Kayla, how do you feel your visibility has contributed to changing minds?
Oh, that's a great question. I would love to know the result uh, of my visibility. But one thing is for certain, I do know that minds can't be changed if they know nothing about us, and they can't know anything about us unless we're visible. So unfortunately, that is a requirement. So I feel like just being there so that people can see that we do exist. We're not some imaginary thing somewhere out, in fairy tale land, that we're a reality, that we're real people, flesh and bone, and we have the same kind of needs and desires as everybody else. So I'm hoping that it's had a positive effect, but if anything, hopefully we're starting conversations.
Great. Well, thank you. So coming back to Kelsey. So what was it like coming out to yourself along with everyone else? I mean, there's a certain piece that's internal, and then obviously it is very difficult coming out to others for most.
Yeah, it was hard, and it was scary. And you know, I started questioning my gender identity and exploring what that meant around the age of, I would say 20, doing that intentionally. I think at some point throughout my whole life, I was always feeling a little like, am I different or what's going on here? But really having a very intentional conversation with myself um, around the age of 20. And yeah, it was hard. You know, what kind of started that was having a lot of discomfort around my chest and, you know, feeling like, well, does that make me trans? Like, do I feel like a man? Do I just not like my chest? Like, what does this mean? I don't know. And so when I bought my first binder, that was like a moment where I was like, okay, this is going to be a journey and I don't really know where it's going to go right now, but we're going to get somewhere eventually. And so I did a lot of work. I came out to my therapist first and worked with her a lot, and came out to my best friend. I came out to my partner, which was really scary because I knew that she would be supportive, but when you're vulnerable and you share that piece of yourself with somebody, there's always that fear of, what if they're not going to love me anymore? What if they don't want to be with me as my authentic self? So that was really scary. Actually, just yesterday and last week, I shared my pronouns with my immediate family, and that was terrifying, but I am lucky and so relieved that they all are on board and willing to try to you know, make me feel the most comfortable that I can be. So it was scary. It was emotional. It was there were good days, there were bad days. There still are good days and bad days. But at the end of the day, I'm so glad that I'm able to be visible, because when I first started, you know, questioning all of this, I told myself that this was going to be my secret. This was going to be something that I was just going to experience and wasn't going to share with anybody else. And so I feel so lucky and privileged to be visible and share space with other amazing visible people.
Great, thank you. And Maximus, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this, but also how it applies to your experience on Slick.
So for me, when I transitioned, I was kind of that kid that just changed their name, didn't let anybody know. I was just kind of like, I mean, figure out if you want to figure out on your own. I don't care. Now as an adult, I have male privilege. I pass as some cisgender male, and not a lot of people can tell I'm transgender. For me personally, my transgender identity is very intimate. I don't let everyone know. If I'm going to trust that person and I know they're going to be in my life forever, then I will let them know. But if we're just casual coworkers or something, I will not let you know, because for me personally, it's a very intimate part of myself, and it's just a vulnerability that I don't want to share with everyone just yet. For me transitioning, I was raised in a Catholic household with Latin parents from Mexico. They migrated here. My mom was just kind of like, oh, I kind of knew already. You were kind of weird at the age of 5, so I kind of knew. I'm just letting you do your own research, express yourself how you want to. And I was just kind of mad at her because I was like, how did you know and not tell me? And she was like, because if I told you, you were going to get mad. You needed to figure out on your own. You don't understand. It's parenting. My father, on the other hand, he didn't take it hard, but he didn't take it well either. He had a lot of microaggression. Whenever he gets in an argument with me, he always goes and calls me my birth name. He always attacks me for my body and everything, and tells me that I will never be a man and that I will never have the same power as him as a man. but so far I really do not care because his idea of a man is completely different than my idea as a man. And at Slick, it was a little difficult at first to get along with my transgender identity because I was nervous of emailing my professors and telling them, hey, this is my name. I know what my birth name is on there, but I need you to address me on this name. These are my pronouns. And I'd always try and keep it quiet so my classmates wouldn't hear it because I would always be afraid that somebody was going to attack me for it, or they were just going to come and start having problems with me for no reason other than the fact that I was a transgender individual. But so far it's been wonderful. I was able to change my preferred name through Slick, and I'm hopefully going to start my name change through the courts. I currently live in Davis County, and they're a little more harsher when it comes to those things. They're not open. So hopefully I start that process soon.
Fantastic. And Nick, so I think that your answer to this could be interesting because having first identified lesbian, then potentially binary, then move into non-binary, coming out may be been a series of coming outs for you. So how is your experience through this?
Yeah, I've gone through a lot of a lot of transitional periods in my life as far as identity goes. I actually was attending Slick when I started my like physical transition process. So I just want to like kind of add on to what Maximus said is it was a little tricky letting my professors know like, you know, hey, you're going to see this on the roll, but this is the name that I go by, and doing assignments online. But Canvas was really good about that. And there were enough adults around who kind of understood what was going on to be very empathetic and helpful in that situation. So for me, it was very scary. I started I saw a therapist. I started hormones without telling any of my family. I knew that it wasn't going to be well received, and I knew that I was going to hear things that weren't going to be helpful for me and where I needed to be. I mean, it took enough time for me to get to that point to want to start taking care of myself, to have, you know, that internal conversation of like, nope, you know, the lesbian's not cutting it. You know, this isn't quite working. You know, there's some overlap here. And so, yeah, it was really scary at first. And then eventually I was just kind of like, this is happening. Are you with me or are you not with me? So I can really empathize with Maximus's experience as well of coming out to family. Some were more supportive than others. Some still dead name and misgender me. Which is pretty wild, but it's just to say that, you know, some people are stuck in their ways, and it doesn't matter how much education they have, you know, how kindly you say things, how often you bring it up. It really is up to the individual, you know, to make those changes for themselves, just like I did for me. So yeah, it has been very interesting. And fortunately, I've had a lot of amazing supportive people along the way in places I didn't expect. And so thankfully, yeah, I'm here now. So.
Great, thank you. Kayla, I'd like to move to an audience question. Utah has grown in its support of the LGBT plus community, at least many think that way. So how would you rate Utah's involvement in the LGBTQ community and its support? And what might be a great area that we need to improve on?
Oh, how would I rate Utah on its support? What's our comparison?
Well, what do
Yeah,
you
no,
think Utah does very well, and what areas do you think we need to work on?
Well, I think that education is something that we need to work on, but we're also doing it well. I say that because it's clear that we're making progress, but it's clear that there is still a long way to go that way. I mean, as mentioned before, there are a few different bills put forth in Utah that were pretty much strictly anti-trans. And so that tells me right there that we have a significant portion of our community who, you know, is still not informed. And if they are informed, they just don't care. So trying to get people to care is hard if they don't know someone who's trans, which is again why events like this are so important, and Transgender Day of Visibility is so important. So I think we're doing okay, but we could be doing a lot better.
Okay, so Kelsey, one of the things that Kayla said was education. Sounds like your wheelhouse a little. How do you feel education's working in the state of Utah towards this goal, and what can we do better education-wise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here at the Utah Pride Center, I work with our director, Amanda, to provide cultural competency trainings to organizations and folks in our state. And there are some that I'm like, we just had a request from a church to do a training in Park City. And so sometimes we're surprised at the folks who reach out to us and are open and willing to get this education. I think there's a long way to go in being able to reach our school districts across the whole state because there's a lot going on there where we need to be supporting our students in much more ways, especially our young kids. And so, I would love to see, I don't know if this will ever happen, but I would love to see every teacher, administrator, faculty, and staff in every school in Utah be trained at least in a 101. That would be, the best goal. We worked with the courts pretty recently, actually, to give them some training. And so there are people, I think, that have surprised us, who have reached out and said, we need this education. We need to know more. We need to do better. But we still definitely, like Kayla said, we've got a ways to go for sure. But I think we're one person at a time. We're making a difference here.
Great, and thank you. And Nick, so taking that, the education tends to lead towards whether we get our legal protections or not. So how has the lack of any legal protections, whether it's healthcare or through identity documents and those types of things, affected you, and how you feel it affects the general community in Utah?
Yes. And that's a loaded question. So I would say I am currently still working on navigating the legal system as far as like changing my government name or my dead name. Just depends on
Can you
how I'm
explain
feeling
what
that
dead
day.
name is for those who haven't heard that before too?
Yeah. So it's the name that my parents so lovingly but so mistakenly gave me at the time of birth. And I just realized, it doesn't really fit how I see myself. But I appreciate they tried really hard. So A for effort. So I think that's really interesting for me to answer that question, because I think the more that we educate people and the more that we, unfortunately have to argue that this is not a phase, that this is who we are, that it's natural to feel that incongruency, that our society like assumes. Anyways, yeah. So I would say that the more that we become aware of that, just how impactful it is to have people address us with the correct name and pronouns, that a lot of the systems that are set up to change last name only will hopefully make it much easier for folks to also change their first name without having to go to court, without having to fill out paperwork, take time off of work to go to court, and all these things. It adds a lot of extra stress. And part of the reason, other than being a really frugal person, about not changing my paperwork, is because why should I have to change? Like, I didn't do anything wrong. People should still respect me and use the name that I asked them to use. So I try and tell myself that it's just an act of defiance and rebellion. I'm not going to pay the government $350 so that people can address me the way that I should be addressed, because I'm a person, and it's called common courtesy and respect. And I don't think the government needs to get involved with everything about me. So yeah, I'm still working on it myself. So I can see how the lack of education and, the swarms of misinformation can make something as empowering as that just so, like, there's just too many hoops to jump through. And I think, yeah, once people become aware about how impactful that is and how life-saving it is to be validated as you are without legal paperwork, the better off we'll all be.
Well, thank you. And Maximus, I have a question from the audience, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. What they ask is, it's from a SLCC student employee, and they ask, I personally have never had a bad experience telling a teacher about my name being different than what's on the roll. But if a student does have an issue with a teacher to do with transgender things, who do they talk to in order to fix it so the issue is handled safely?
So I personally never had an issue at SLCC. I did have an issue in high school when I was first starting to change my name. There was one specific teacher who wouldn't refuse to address to transgender people by their name, pronoun, and everything. I spoke to adults that I trusted. I spoke to my counselor because I had that trust. Not everybody trusts their counselor. I'm not saying every counselor is going to solve your problems. They can sometimes even add onto those problems. But personally, I spoke to a lot of teachers that I knew would respect me as a person and that I trusted a lot and could be vulnerable with. And they helped handle it, and it went up to the administration and they spoke with the principal and everything. And that's how I got it situated. The most important thing is you find an adult that you can trust and be vulnerable with and go with that adult, because I can guarantee it'll be so much more easier. That way you don't have to have direct contact with that professor either, or have like a very tense conversation or a tense situation and a problem where you put yourself at harm or anything like that.
Thank you. And Kayla, you'd like to add to that thought?
Yeah, I know that particular question was geared towards more education, but that's a problem that we face in everyday life. Comes up constantly. Anytime we have to call anywhere for customer service, anytime we have to go to the bank, anytime we have to verify our identity in any way, it's a significant issue. Additionally, when we're talking about employment, I was actually outed my last place of work unintentionally, albeit. My manager was confused at why my name was different than what was on payroll. And so he asked me outright in front of everybody there and said, hey, who is this person? And why is this on your account? So it's a significant thing that should be addressed. Like, no one should ever be put in that situation of having to suddenly say, hey, yeah, I'm trans, deal with it, if they don't want to. But yeah, the fix in the end turned out to be a simple talk with IT. So it shouldn't really be, something that is that difficult. We should just be able to talk with HR and have it, taken care of from the beginning. But those situations do exist, is what I'm trying to say.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to stay with you to start the next question. And that is, how do you experience intersectional identities?
Oh, that's a great question.
That's why I
asked. Not a lot of people know this, but about 1 in 6 transgender individuals also happen to be autistic. And I, in this case, am autistic. Autism, just like gender, just like sexuality, happens to be a spectrum. So one person can't be more or less autistic than another person. They just have different needs in certain areas. And so having that compounding identity makes it a little bit challenging at times in certain interactions, but I guess knowing is better than not knowing, and allows me the ability to communicate. Again, having those labels, as we've talked about before, does sometimes put us into boxes, and that's what it feels like sometimes. But it does free us up to be able to communicate and learn more.
Great, and thank you. And Nick, I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so as a queer, non-binary Latinx person, yeah, there's a lot of layers of my identity, and then also having recent diagnoses from all my doctors, yay insurance. I've realized more about myself too. I'm not gonna come out about all of that, but it's been really interesting to just kind of navigate spaces, like I said earlier, with my male privilege, but still realizing that I am still a person of color, and still realizing that, because I'm fat, I'm treated a certain way, or because other things about me that society generally rejects. I know that seems like, how does that fit into this? But I just realized I'm othered constantly, right? It's like, yes, this is a trans person, but they're this, they're that, or they're not a binary trans person, or just different things that people try and punish you for somehow. And it's like, I have just come into who I am and just owning all those parts about myself. And sometimes it can be a little isolating, but I think it's just to stick to the theme here that I know who I am, and that's enough. And I'm fortunate enough, again, to have a support system that sees me for me and meets me where I'm at. But yeah, it could be really problematic, and I've often felt ostracized or out of place for different reasons. So the anxiety of being hyper vigilant everywhere I go and trying to figure out, okay, is it because I'm brown? Is it because I'm non-binary? Is it because I'm a bigger person? Is it because I'm in a mixed race relationship? There are just so many things. So I love all those parts about myself. It took a long time to get to this place. And I have some good days and some bad days. But I do think it's really interesting. And I think once you've been marginalized in one way, it doesn't necessarily get easier once those layers are added on, but it's interesting. I'll just leave it at that. It's definitely interesting.
And I love all the parts of you, Nick, too. That's what makes you such an amazing person. Kelsey, I'd like to, because you work at the Pride Center, you probably get a very unique perspective on this, but we're in not even probably, we're in a very faith-based community. So how do you feel that impacts the transgender community being in a faith-based community like this?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, I myself am not a person of faith, but we certainly work with a lot of youth and families who do come from a religious background. And, you know, it can be really challenging. There are some of our youth who are rejected from their families because of their religious beliefs. There are some youth and families who will come to us and say, look, I love my child and I want to support my child. And at the same time, I'm really grappling with, I've been of this faith for my whole life. And how do I, reconcile those things? And how do I come to a place where I can be okay with my child and be okay with my faith? And is that possible? And so we've certainly had a lot of really, interesting and sometimes difficult conversations with our youth and with our the families that we work with to, can you be trans and still be a part of this religion? And, that's kind of each individual's journey to go through and work through. But we definitely see the impacts that it can have on our community in being rejected from their families, or, maybe a lot of their friends are a part of a certain church, and they maybe are leaving the church and they aren't going to have any friends now because their friends won't be friends with them. And so we work really hard to create a space here where they can make new friends and they can, meet new people that will affirm them and support them. So it certainly can be really difficult and complex, and has been something that I have learned a lot from, being somebody who is not from Utah and is not affiliated with any religion. It's definitely been new to me, but very eye-opening to see the experiences that a lot of trans folks face.
Great, thank you. And Maximus, would you like to talk to this from your experience? How being in a faith-based community has impacted your experience in coming out?
So, like I said, I was raised in a Catholic household. I was a very religious kid when I was younger. I knew every prayer memorized. I used to pray with my mom 3 times a day. And that was difficult. Coming out to myself was almost impossible because I was like, oh my gosh, God isn't going to love me anymore. And I'm going to go to hell and I'm being damned for the rest of my life. And so in a part during my transition and figuring out who I was, I became atheist. But now that I'm comfortable with my gender identity, I've accepted that I do believe in a God. I just don't believe in religion, because religion is it can be so evil, it can be so harming, it can kill people, it destroys people, it rips families apart, it does the opposite of what it claims to do. But I do believe there's a God, and I believe that they technically, they don't care enough about things. I feel like there's so much more important issues than me starting testosterone and being like, hey, identify this way. Like, I feel like that's just how I feel. I feel like I have a beautiful relationship with the God that I believe in. I feel like I can believe in him, but I just can't stand with religion just because it harms too many people and it kills too many people, whether it be directly or they unfortunately commit suicide or anything. I just can't stand behind that. And in Utah, we can't seem to separate our religious beliefs and seeing other people as human beings. We can't get that passed across each other. We're like, oh, you're automatically a part of the LGBT community. I can't be friends with you. You're a horrible person. You're going to be damned to hell or anything. And it's just like, if we can just agree that you have a religion and I'm this way, and we can just accept that, we don't necessarily need to be in each other's faces, but as long as we can understand and accept each other, we can all live peacefully without causing anybody to die in between.
Great, thank you. And Kayla, you'd like to add to that?
I would, yes, thank you. So my experience growing up as trans in a faith-based community is when I was 10, I moved from Utah. So I did originally come from Utah, although I don't like to claim it. I moved to Minnesota when I was 10. I was homeschooled. I didn't have any exposure to any of the world really, except what was there in the church. Did lots of missionary work. This is with the LDS Church. We grew our area from a size of 10 people to over 150. So when I was a kid, I was just constantly entrenched in this missionary work mindset. Then I served a mission, went to Korea, came back, went to BYU. All this time, one thing that really fascinated me was I was taught that if I had enough faith, that the mysteries of the universe would be revealed to me. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have enough faith so I can learn the mysteries. But while at BYU, my Book of Mormon professor taught us it was okay to ask questions. So I asked questions. The answers weren't coming from the Book of Mormon, they were coming from my other professors at BYU, specifically in geology, learning about evolution, the Big Bang, etc. So I did eventually become an atheist. I came out as atheist. I left the church. And then I came out after the fact as trans. So, like Nick has said, there are a number of different times coming out, but a lot of that was so heavily influenced by my religious background. I was taught that even the thought of it was a sin. So I was constantly thought policing myself, through all those years. And it takes a serious toll on a person to be told that everything about yourself is evil. So, yeah, it took some doing to really get to a place where I could undo all of that, indoctrination against who I was, get rid of that thought process. So it's interesting to see that now. It's been a number of years since I've been out of the church and been expressing myself, fully. That's not as big of a thing for me anymore, but I see it affecting other members of our community, and it breaks my heart to see them struggle through the same kind of things that I had to struggle through also, and feel completely powerless to do anything about it. So it's definitely a struggle growing up in a community that just does not understand and doesn't seem to have a lot of desire to understand.
Thank you. And so Kelsey, one thing you would like to say to your younger self or to the younger transgender kids on the whole as a piece of advice from your experience?
Yeah, I would say, be patient with yourself. Um, these things can be, hard to figure out, and the things that we are conditioned to believe about ourselves can take a while to unlearn, and kind of untangle. And so, whatever you might be feeling is valid, and whoever you are and whoever you come to understand yourself as is valid. And I what really drives my work with working with the youth is to be who I needed when I was younger. So to be somebody who some of our youth might see themselves in, or might be able to reach out and say, hey, I want to use these pronouns instead of these other pronouns. Can you use them for me? And being that person that says absolutely. And just, I just want our youth to find the place that they feel brave and safe to be themselves, and just know that there is a community out here for them who will embrace them and affirm them and be there for them through whatever they might end up going through.
Thank you. Nick, what piece of advice would you give to our young transgender community members?
I'd be like, go talk to Kelsey. They have all the answers. I'm just kidding. No, I love what they said though. And yeah, just to add to that, I would let people know that it's okay to set boundaries. Boundaries are important, and I think, I mean, in my own experience, I didn't have very many, because I never saw myself represented anywhere. I never felt validated. I was never allowed the space or the alleged free will that I was given, and actually be able to use that, to find out who I was and allow myself to be that person. Um, so I would just say it's okay to, yeah, set boundaries. It's okay to disconnect yourself from people that maybe your family, maybe blood, but you matter. Your feelings are valid. And if people are not going to validate you, chosen family is just as good, if not better. And you do deserve a support system, and you do deserve love and people who are going to respect you. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it's not the people that we grew up with. And so I just want to say there's no shame in finding the support that you need any way that you can. Um, and yeah, please don't feel pressured, to spend time with people or listening to comments or any other anti-trans rhetoric out there. It's okay to, get off social media. It's okay to take breaks from people. Just please take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Maximus, I have two questions from the audience here related to SLCC, so I'd like to get your thoughts on them. They're related, so I'm going to put them together. One says, what are the biggest barriers you've experienced at SLCC? How could we be stronger allies to address these? And then the next one says, how can we be better allies at SLCC for trans students, faculty, staff, etc.? HR policies, medical leave, scholarship funds available to support legal and medical expenses for name changes, etc. That's a lot, but to go back to the first one, what's the biggest barriers you have? And then how can allies help improve these things?
The biggest barrier I had for a while was Canvas. It still had my birth name on there for a while, and some professors would refuse to use my name when I was giving it to them in class. So it was weird. They wouldn't be marking me on attendance roll. But Canvas has fixed that sense. It's not something Slick could control. So far for barriers that I've had at Slick, I don't think I've had any. Most of the professors have been fantastic, if not overly fantastic. They've all worked with me. I had my English professor, Cassandra Goff. She helped me get in touch with the correct person to change my preferred name on Slick's roles. It'd just be nice if that information was a little more available or more open or advertised out for transgender people, because I had no idea I could do that until I spoke with my professor about my concerns. It'd be nice if there was more resources, like if we would get messages like perfectly for those resources, that we don't have to actually speak to somebody to get those resources. Like they kind of seem hidden, but they're not. Sometimes you just can't find them when you're looking for them, and it'd just be nice if you could just click something and it'll give you all those resources right there, who to get into contact with, who's safe to speak with, and all that. That would help a lot, especially if you don't feel comfortable speaking to your professor directly.
Thank you. So to talk about it on a broader scale, Kayla, could you discuss some strategies cisgender allies can better use their privilege to help support transgender folks? And this is another audience question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, the best way to support us is get to know us, learn our stories like you're doing right now, and then kind of help us to find areas where we may be lacking of resources or manpower, or even just a positive word now and then, things like that that can help us to fill those gaps. I think the biggest thing that you can do is stand up for us whenever we're in a situation where we're being threatened, whether it's in person or even online. Just defend us, come to our aid when we need it. That's what we need. We just need you to be there when we need you, and take a back seat when it's a trans specific issue that only we can speak to.
Kelsey, would you like to add some thoughts to that?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Kayla just said there. Listening to our stories, understanding who we are, educating yourself, taking it upon yourself to learn about things, rather than always assuming that the trans people in your life or trans people you meet will educate you and are willing to do that, because that's a lot of work and emotional work to do. If somebody uses pronouns with is out with their pronouns in front of people that you are with, and they are not using the correct pronouns, correct them. So we don't always have to be the ones to do that. If somebody tells you that they go by a different name or different pronouns, respect that, and use that name, use those pronouns. And the biggest thing is to just don't just be an ally when it's convenient for you. Don't just be an ally on Trans Day of Visibility or Trans Day of Remembrance. Be an ally always, because we don't get to choose when we are trans and when we're not trans. And so we need you there to advocate for us, to help us, fight this fight, and be seen as people who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect.
Thank you. And Nick, you'd like to add to this?
Yes, a couple things. So I would say don't out people. It doesn't matter how proud you are of your one token trans friend. It's not okay. If somebody entrusts you with that information, understand the weight that comes with it. And I think, again, to just add to what Kelsey and Kayla said, getting to know people, debunking those myths, breaking those stereotypes by actually putting in the work and not putting that emotional labor on the person that you're trying to get to know. And I would say just from a personal standpoint, professional standpoint, I think normalizing how we introduce ourselves, using our name and our pronouns, using pronouns in our email signatures. I can tell you that if I get an email and they have their pronouns in their signature, I know that they're going to respect my pronouns, and that I'm not going to have to give them the whole spiel about, hey, I'm a person and I deserve your respect. I don't know what you heard, but this is not an option. They're not my preferred anything. These are my pronouns. So I think just, normalizing people having to come out to you by sharing their pronouns, because we do have these internal or implicit biases, right? We want to read people and put them into those boxes we talked about obliterating earlier in the conversation. And so it's important to just remember even something as simple as, I keep using air quotes. I'm just so excited about what I'm sharing. Just it's really something very simple, but it truly is life-saving. And I think once people realize how much of an impact, a positive impact that they can have on our community, that it'll hopefully just, spread. Um, we need better analogies. Spread like wildfire, a safe wildfire that can be put out. Yeah, and just, yeah, I think if people realize how much their words and that validation means, that more people will start doing it. And I think that's one place that we can all start.
Great. And Maximus, would you like to add your thoughts too? What can they do for you or for the community?
For me personally, my mom, she's very like proud of it and everything, but we had a discourse once when she was telling some family members of mine that I was transgender. And so I had to set that boundary. Always set boundaries in what you're not comfortable with. I had to explain to her that I'm not shaming her for being proud of me, but that I had to explain to her that I had the right to tell people that I was transgender because that was my identity, and that she was stealing that right from me, that she was not giving me the opportunity to whether tell somebody or not, and just basically just set boundaries, and have cisgender people follow those, just like Kelsey said. If you see somebody whose pronouns are not being used properly, stand up for them. They're most likely very anxious and afraid because they don't know how to protect themselves or defend themselves. So you be that person that will defend them and protect them. It could be scary, but just do it. They're more scared than you are because they're not sure how people are going to react. That's really one thing you can do. I struggled a lot correcting people with my pronouns when I wasn't passing as a cisgender person. So a lot of people would always tell me, well, why don't you do it yourself? Because sometimes I don't have the emotional willpower to tell you, hey, I've told you 20 times over, my pronouns are he, him. Like, what is this? Sometimes we're just exhausted and we just need a little backup. And that's practically what you guys could do to make it better for us.
Thank you. So the popular question of the session, I was already planning on asking this, and I have two different audience questions with that. Local resources. So I think there's a great way to start this. And Kelsey, since you're in the youth area, tell us what you feel are the great youth resources around the Salt Lake City area for anybody listening.
Yeah, so here at the Pride Center, we have programming in our youth and family department for youth ages 10 to 22. And so we have support groups, we have activity nights, we have a group on healthy intimacy skills, we have a queer representation group, we have resources if you need binders, or if you need clothing, you want to explore wearing different clothing, we can make an appointment and have you come in and pick some things out. We are a safe space for you to come whoever you are. If you change your name, we will respect that and we will change it in everything and use it. If you change your pronouns, we will respect those and use them. And so, we try really hard here at the Pride Center to do everything we can to support our youth. And a really great thing that came from COVID unexpectedly is now we don't just serve Salt Lake. We can serve the entire state of Utah. We have youth in Cedar City, in Logan, in Eagle Mountain, like everywhere across the state. And so you don't have to just be in the Salt Lake area to access our resources. At the Pride Center, we have mental health resources. If you need individual therapy, we can get you connected there. So yeah, that's what I can say on our youth and family side of things.
Well, thank you. And Nick, on the adult side, what resources do you see Utah Pride Center and potentially others that a transgender individual can use in this area?
Yeah, I like how you said that it was like very sultry on the adult side. And then here I am. So yeah, for folks 18 and up, or who we no longer consider a youth, we do have support groups, peer support groups. All of them are on our calendar. There's so many. We have like coffee talk. I know Sage has a lot of programming for folks 50 and up. So right now, with the Pride Center being closed, everything is done virtually. So we're hoping that that has made it more accessible for people. But I know as restrictions are being lifted, we are hoping to start planning more in-person events. But there are a lot of resources on our website. I also defer folks to Facebook groups online. There's a lot of transgender support online, and one of my favorites is the non-binary. Oh gosh, I don't want to mess it up because there are so many. Non-binary support group, and they actually have files for like legal name and gender marker change and other things like that that we've actually borrowed from these community spaces. So really, I see the Pride Center as a platform for all of the work that a lot of our community members are doing. We are doing work here in this space, but I mean, we've got to give credit where credit's due. And so we're really lucky that we have very active and supportive community members that send us information, flyers, events, resources that we can share on our page. So please check it out.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask each of you for a closing thought. It's Transgender Day of Visibility. We've had the questions we've already answered. What's this one thought that you want left to share with everybody as we close the panel? Kayla, if you could go first.
Oh, of course, you would ask me first.
Good.
No, thank you, though. The one thing that I want you to take away from this, an open mind, an open heart, and a willingness and desire to assist the community where you can. Just kind of be there. And thank you so much for being here. The fact that you're here asking these questions and hearing our answers speaks a lot to that desire anyway. And so I just want to acknowledge and appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. Maximus, what would you like to add?
I would like to add for transgender youth, transitioning isn't a competition. I cannot stress this enough for you. Do not compare yourself to other people. We all move at different rates, just like puberty was the first time. This is not a competition. We are all beautiful and we are all going to transition at our own pace. And that's all you need to know, because the second you start competing, you're going to get anxious and you're going to start hating yourself again.
Okay, thank you. And Kelsey?
Yeah, I would say, to cisgender folks out there, to really take away that we all may be trans, but we are all trans in different ways. And we are not meant to be lumped into this same one category. And so to really work to remove that assumption that we're all the same, that we all transition in the same ways, and things like that. But also, respect us, see us for who we are, celebrate us. And to all of the trans folks out there who are visible, I see you, you are valid. And to those who aren't able to be visible, I still see you and value you and love you and respect you.
Thank you. And Nick?
Kelsey's stealing all my answers. Oh my gosh, we talked about this. No, I love that answer, and I would just emulate that and say you are valid, and being visible is a privilege. I was looking at some statistics, and for Black trans women, the life expectancy is 30 to 35. I'm 32. So, I mean, you got to think about all of the privilege that we have, even as multiply marginalized people, and understand that, not everybody's going to be on the same page or transition the same way. You don't have to be dysphoric to be trans. You don't need surgery. You don't need hormones, but it's great, right, that we have those resources available. And I've been fortunate enough to find congruency within myself because of those things that have that I've been able to partake of. Just, you never know what somebody's experiencing. It costs nothing to be kind. And I mean, all the trans people I know, I would never want to mess with. So it's better to have us as allies. I think I think just being mindful that we're all working through things. And something Kelsey also mentioned earlier is, we all have much more in common than we do have differences. And I think, it can be very divisive to categorize people and make assumptions. And so I think just being authentic with ourselves, finding people who will allow us to be that way around them, and not being afraid to remove yourselves from those people in those spaces, because you will end up finding the right people for you. And it is lonely and it is isolating, but we're here. We made it through in spite of all of that, and we're more than happy to help folks who are in those beginning stages of self-actualization. So I know there's been a lot of turmoil in the community, and with some organizations that represent and serve those communities, but Kelsey and I are still here, and so we hope that people recognize us as safe people, and the Utah Pride Center is a safe space, and also let us know what we can do to be that space for people. Right? We have a lot of work to do. Nobody's perfect, but we're here for what it's worth, and you do matter, and we're always happy to help.
Every step of the way is progress, and we're constantly moving forward. I want to thank all of you on the panel, Nick, Kelsey, Maximus, Kayla. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your emotional energy that goes into this. Thank you much for serving on this panel. For all of the transgender people out there that are listening, to go from the end of my radio show, I see you, I hear you, and I love everyday people like you. Heather, I'd like to turn this back over to you. And if you could, to tie off one of the closing questions on resources, we probably have a lot of SLCC students listening. So if you could give them how they can access your resources, it would be a great close.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I do want to thank everyone for joining us today on behalf of the Gender and Sexuality Student Resource Center, which actually is probably one of the biggest resources at SLCC that you have with regards to trans and queer issues. Please, please, please always feel free to reach out to anybody. They're going to be able to help you. And we also have the Queer Student Association. Again, I'm the interim president, and I would love for anybody who wants to come and share their story, share space with us. Please feel free to do so, and you can reach out to me through Queer Student Association sources. And we can get you any information for that as well. There are resources on campus. There are people who love you just for who you are, and we want to share space with you. We want to help you to discover your true self. Again, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We're happy to have been able to share Trans Day of Visibility with you all. I hope that all of the attendees found this panel to be educational and empowering. And I want to especially say thank you to Sue. Thank you so much for moderating for us, and our panelists, Kelsey, Kayla, Nick, and Maximus. It was so nice to have all of you here today. Thank you so much for your energy and all of the labor that you put into this. We appreciate you being here. Thank you.